All right, well, today I wanted to talk about why logistics are so important for getting laid and dating. I'll be telling some stories on how logistics made it easier to get laid, as well as have a better dating life as opposed to having really bad logistics. Since 2018, I've been to Vegas about 6 times. You might hear this and think I'm some degenerate gambler, sex addict, or cokehead, and you'd be somewhat correct. I do love playing poker, and over the years, during certain periods of time, I've developed a bit of a sex addiction. I've only done cocaine twice, and both were back in college. But that's beside the point. Maybe it's the bright lights of Las Vegas or the crazy nightlife, but Sin City has always called me back. I've always given in to the temptation. On a lot of these trips, I've gone clubbing with my friends. The first time I went to Vegas was about 7 years ago. We had stayed at the Luxor. I wasn't making much money back then, and the Luxor in Vegas was always a lot cheaper back then as well, especially a lot more cheaper than it is now. But we had decided to go to the Hakkasan nightclub, which was in the MGM Grand, which is on the south end of the strip, and it was very close to Luxor, pretty much within walking distance, a decent walking distance. You could walk there, and it wasn't that far. Back then, I didn't really have a concept of logistics when it came to getting laid. I mean, I had an idea that obviously it was important, but I wasn't very strategic about it. So we just happened to choose the Hakkasan because we heard it was the best club, and it just kind of happened to luckily be really close to the Luxor. So we ended up pre-gaming in the room, and we did a bunch of fireball shots and headed over to the Hakkasan. We waited in the GA line, and it was an hour wait. Nightclubs are a humiliation ritual if you don't buy a table, because especially in Vegas, because you're literally herded in like cows, and it just takes forever. So we end up getting through the GA line, and we end up somehow getting onto the dance floor. And I see this girl, she was decently attractive, brown hair, brown eyes. And I remember doing this really dumb move where I put my hand out for a high five and I twirled her around and then I pulled her back into me, and it just worked. So it worked on her. So we started grinding on the dance floor and we started making out, and this girl was just fucking crazy. She put her hand on my neck and started choking me. And she was a freak, so I kind of just played back with her. I was pulling her hair and just started making out for a while. She kept grabbing my chin and staring at me with this really crazy look. I'm not gonna lie, I definitely grew a throbbing hard-on from this. She had a friend that had also been flirting with one of my other friends, so the four of us leave, and the girl he was with wanted us to all go back to Treasure Island where they were staying. And I remember thinking in my head, yo, fuck that. We're not going all the way to Treasure Island. We were already so close to the Luxor. The girl that I was with's friends was really, really trying to get us to go to Treasure Island. And I was not having it. I had suggested we go back to Luxor because it was closer, and they finally agreed. So we ended up all going back to Luxor, and it was actually a pretty short Uber, maybe less than 5 minutes. And I went back to the room I was staying in with my girl. And my friend was taking his girl back to his room at the Luxor. We stayed in the same floor or whatever. But for some reason, his girl, she was just being crazy. She was kept really trying to get him to go back to her place at Treasure Island. I have no idea why. This girl was just being really annoying. So I was happy to break off from her. So they ended up taking a long ass Uber to go all the way back to Treasure Island. And by the time they got there, he had told me that the next day, he told me that his girl wasn't in the mood anymore, and that they had just cuddled for a few hours, and then he left because she just wanted to go to sleep. My girl and I had hooked up when we got back to the Luxor, but honestly, I could have been in the same situation as my friend if I had stayed in another hotel that was much further away. Bottom line, when it comes to hooking up, especially in a place like Vegas, if you're going to choose a nightclub, you want to ideally choose a club that's in the same hotel you're staying at or very, very close within walking distance. But fast forward many years, another friend of mine from college, we were back in Vegas and we were staying at the Mirage, which is basically on the very north end of the strip. And I wasn't much of a planner that year either. And I had booked a table at this rooftop nightclub called the Foundation Room, which is at the far south end of the strip in the Mandalay Bay. So basically I set ourselves up for horrible logistics, not even thinking through because I was a fucking idiot. It's I got dumber as I got older when it came to this stuff. Nowadays, if I ever go clubbing in a place like Vegas, I'm much more strategic. So we booked a table at the Foundation Room, and the host actually brings us these 2 girls. They were sisters, and they were both pretty attractive. They were from Montana. One was blonde. She sat next to my friend, and the other one was brunette, which sat next to me. I got lucky that night because the brunette was single, And my friend unfortunately got unlucky because the blonde was like in a long-term relationship. But my friend was he was a huge Slayer in college, and he knew me from back when I was like a fat, smelly sub-5 male. He knew me when I was at my worst, so it was my time to shine. And funny enough, I did overhear the blonde tell him that she would sleep with him if, she weren't in a committed relationship, which is wild. But luckily she didn't cheat on her boyfriend, so, props to her. But this girl and I were flirting. We had a few glasses of champagne, and then we just started making out. We ended up all going out on the balcony, like overlooking the strip, and my friend had an idea to go to Omnia nightclub. And my girl and I were down. Looking back, I was trying to make my friend happy because, like I said, my girl's sister wanted to head back to where she was staying at, and this was his first time in Vegas, so I wanted to kind of show him a good time. I didn't want to just ditch him and go back to the hotel, but to be honest, that would have been the smartest thing to do. And I can't remember what hotel they stayed at. It might have been the Mandalay Bay in that case. If that's the case, I'm a fucking idiot for not just going to her room, but I wanted to make sure my best friend from college had fun that night. So my girl and I were definitely in the mood. We're making out as we waited for the Uber, but the Uber was taking like super, super long to get there. And then it took like almost a half hour in traffic getting down the strip. And then it also took a while to get into Omnia. So I was making every mistake humanly possible in the logistics playbook. We went into Omnia and we had some drinks and then hit the dance floor, made out a little bit. And then she had to go to the bathroom right before we left. And she was taking forever in there. Like she was probably taking like a massive shit or something. And that felt like eternity, but she finally came out, and then we had to walk from Caesars to the Mirage. She was wearing like heels, and like it just wasn't ideal, which luckily it wasn't that far. But moral of the story, I should have planned ahead of time to stay at the Mandalay because that was the hotel we were getting bottle service at. If you go clubbing in Vegas, remember this video and don't make the same mistake and just go to a nightclub that's in your hotel, because if you do hit it off with a girl, you literally just have to go right up the elevator instead of taking an Uber from one end of the strip to the other. You'll have a much higher chance of getting laid. Luckily, we did finally make it back to the room, and we did have some Bible study, but it was nowhere near as good as it could have been if I had a room at the Mandalay, because by that time, the mood had kind of gone down. She was very tired. I was very tired. We both had a lot to drink. We were both pretty sloppy. It just like really wasn't ideal. Really just remember this video and choose good logistics. Ideally for getting laid, it's all about staying close to where the bars and clubs are, ideally within walking distance. But from a dating perspective, logistics also matter a ton. If your place is nowhere close to the main city center or town center, your dating life is going to be negatively affected by this. I remember in my mid-20s, I lived in an apartment that was like really far away. It was like in a residential neighborhood where I rented a room. And the closest nightlife place was probably like a 30-minute drive. And I would have to drive really far to even meet a girl for a date, because in the town I was living in, there were like no decent dating places. There was just like all fast food. And like it really just made it a lot harder logistically to drive a far distance to meet a girl. And then if we did hit it off, it would be much, much harder to get a girl to come back to my apartment, as it was really far away. When I did bring girls over to this apartment, it was like super inconvenient for them. And it really just wasn't ideal. I now live in an area where there are a bunch of upscale restaurants and a few bars literally within walking distance. It's like a nice town center where I can literally walk from the apartment complex to these bars and restaurants within 2 minutes. And it just makes your dating life so much better. You suggest one of the bars or the restaurants right in the town center, and basically I can walk over and within 2 minutes meet them for a date. And if we hit it off, we can walk 100 feet to the next bar to have another drink. And then, we can go back to my apartment. I'll just suggest we play a game of pool or have a glass of wine in the apartment. And things are a lot easier to move things forward. I think living within walking distance of the area where the bars and restaurants are is the best piece of dating advice I can give you, because it just makes things a million times easier. It's a lot easier to say a girl like, hey, let's go back to my place and have a glass of wine if you literally live within a 2-minute walk from there, as opposed to saying, yeah, you just need to drive like 30 minutes from here and we can have a drink at my place. It's really common sense, but not many guys think this far ahead. I think a lot of guys after their, mid to late 20s, if they're single, like a lot of them will live in these apartment complexes that are really far away from, the main city center. And it's it's gonna, like I said, it's gonna have a huge negative impact on your dating life. Also, another factor to consider is the distance you set on dating apps. I used to be very guilty of putting the distance to like 60 or 80 miles, and you do get more matches this way, I'm not gonna lie, but this is actually a pain in the ass a lot of the time, because you'll be driving very far sometimes to meet the girls in the middle, or sometimes you're driving all the way to them, and you might be driving like 40, 45, even an hour to go see them, and you're nowhere near your place. So if the date does go well, it's a much tougher sell to convince them to come back to your place. And like I said, if you're an hour away or an hour and a half away, like sometimes it's just not possible unless you can go to their place. Whereas if you set it to maybe 15 or 20 miles, as long as you live in a pretty populated area and you're using, one of the big three, Bumble, Tinder, Hinge, they're more likely to meet you near your apartment if you do live in that town center, especially if the place you suggest is like somewhat kind of well known. Like I said, just having good logistics and living near a town center will save you an incredible amount of time, gas money, and it'll just save you from bad logistics. Well, that's my take on why logistics are so important for getting laid and dating. If you've enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like. Feel free to comment down below your perspective on logistics, and feel free to subscribe. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care.